Lucie Wayne had spent years pretending her stepmother and stepsister were family. She had ignored the subtle digs, the favoritism, the way her stepmother Vivian always made sure she felt like an outsider in her own home. But she had never expected Celeste to betray her like this. Clutching the doorknob to Axel's penthouse, Lucie inhaled deeply. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. She had spent the entire day finalizing wedding details, excited to share them with the man she thought loved her. Then she heard it, soft laughter, a sound that was both familiar and gut-wrenching. Her stepsister's laugh. Lucie's fingers trembled as she pushed the door open, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sight before her made the world stop. Axel lay tangled in bed with Celeste, their bodies entwined in the very sheets Lucie had picked out for their future. Celeste, her supposed sister, smirked as if this had been inevitable. Axel's eyes widened in panic. "Lucie, wait! It's not what you think!" Axel scrambled off the bed, reaching for her. Lucie stepped back. "Don't!" Her voice was cold, steady, despite the chaos in her chest. Celeste stretched lazily, a victorious gleam in her eyes. "Oh, come on, Lucie. Don't act so shocked. Did you really think Axel wanted to marry you?" The words cut deeper than they should have. Lucie turned on her heel and walked out, ignoring Axel's desperate calls. She had spent her whole life watching Celeste take what was hers. This time, she wouldn't break. This time, she would take something back. Lucie ran. Not home, not to her father's house, but to the first place that promised anonymity. A bar bathed in golden lights, filled with strangers who didn't know her, who wouldn't pity her. The city pulsed around her, but she felt nothing. Drink after drink burned down her throat, numbing the ache in her chest. The betrayal, the humiliation, the years of fighting for love, only to be discarded like she was nothing. Rough night? A deep voice pulled her from the haze. Lucie turned, her blurred gaze settling on the man beside her. He was striking, broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive black suit, his brown eyes gleaming under the dim lighting. "I don't want to talk about it," she muttered, reaching for another shot. He didn't pry. Instead, he ordered 2 more drinks, sliding one toward her. "Then let's drink to forget." Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was the pain. But Lucie let go. The stranger's warmth drowned out everything else as the night melted into tangled sheets and whispered promises neither intended to keep. Lucie's head pounded as she stirred awake, the soft silk sheets unfamiliar against her skin. A dull ache settled in her body, reminding her of the reckless choices of the night before. Then she felt it, warmth beside her. Her breath hitched as she turned her head, her gaze landing on the man lying beside her. His dark hair was tousled from sleep, strong arms resting lazily across the sheets. The very same man who had drowned out her pain with whispered promises and forbidden touches. Lucie's heart hammered in her chest. What have I done? Carefully, she slipped out of bed, her fingers grasping for her dress in the dim morning light. If she could just leave quietly, she could pretend this never happened. Pretend that, for once, she hadn't made an impulsive mistake. But just as she reached for her shoes, a deep, smooth voice stopped her. "You're leaving without a goodbye?" Lucie froze. Slowly, she turned to find deep brown eyes watching her, amusement flickering in them. He looked utterly at ease, as if last night had been just another indulgence for him. "It was just one night," she said quickly, trying to steady her voice. He smirked, propping himself up on his elbow. "Pity. I rather enjoyed it." Lucie's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain composed. "Goodbye," she muttered, slipping out the door before he could say anything else. After their passionate one-night stand, Lucie tried to forget the mysterious stranger, but fate had other plans. Ruslan sought her out, drawn by her fire and resilience. Their encounters became frequent, first chance meetings at charity galas and business events, then intentional dates filled with deep conversations and undeniable chemistry. Ruslan was relentless yet respectful, charming her with grand gestures, an entire rooftop dinner under the stars, unexpected gifts with handwritten notes, and moments of raw vulnerability where he let her see beyond his cold exterior. Lucie, despite her heartbreak, found herself falling, this time without regret. He made her feel seen and desired. One morning, Lucie woke up to the sound of her doorbell. She opened the door drowsily, only to find a delivery box on the ground with a note attached to it. She picked up the note and read it with a loving smile on her face. Can you do me the honor of meeting at our favorite bar tonight, Ruslan? Lucie knowingly smiled to herself. She couldn't help herself, but she had fallen hard in love with Ruslan. Opening the box, she found an elegant cream dinner gown. Later that evening, the door of the bar where Lucie and Ruslan met opened, and Lucie stepped in looking astonishing in her cream gown. Ruslan, seated at a dimly lit corner, saw her and was stunned by her beauty. He kept staring, with his mouth wide open, till Lucie walked up to his table and sat down. As the night progressed, Lucie was still discussing with him when he pulled out a velvet box and went down on one knee. "Lucie," he said, "I know we've not known each other for a long time, but the past few months have the best of my life. You complete me, and I would love you to do me the honor of being my wife." Lucie looked on with tears glistening in her eyes. She stretched out her hand and accepted the ring. She doesn't know what tomorrow brings. But she's sure of one thing. Ruslan loves her, and she loves him too. The next morning, Axel suddenly appeared at her apartment later. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. "You made your point, Lucie, but this is too much." Lucie frowned. "What are you talking about?" Axel scoffed, stepping closer and tossed a magazine onto her coffee table. The front page sent a cold wave crashing over her. Her mind reeled as she stared at the glossy photograph of her and the man from last night, Ruslan Score, her ex-fiancé's uncle. Lucie's stomach churned as realization hit her like a freight train. She had slept with and gotten engaged to Axel's uncle. Before Lucie could fully grasp the situation, the sound of tires screeching outside made her flinch. A sleek black car pulled up in front of her apartment building. The door opened, and out stepped Ruslan Score. Lucie barely had time to process his presence before he was walking toward her. His brown eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "Babe," he greeted smoothly, "what the hell is going on?" she demanded, gesturing to the magazine still clutched in her hand. Ruslan's lips twitched in amusement, but he didn't answer. Instead, he walked inside and sat comfortably on a sofa. Lucie, remembering how Axel had betrayed her, lifted her fingers, showing Axel her diamond ring, and let the words roll out of her lips like silk. "Hello, Axel. I am your uncle's fiancé." Axel's face was drained of color. His lips parted, but only one word escaped. "What?" Axel lunged forward. "You're joking," he scoffed, his voice laced with disbelief. She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Why? Because I shouldn't marry a man who actually wants me." Axel's jaw clenched. "You don't even know him." Ruslan, who had been silent up until now, let out a low chuckle. "And yet, she knows enough to say yes." He slid an arm around Lucie's waist, his touch firm, possessive. "You of all people should know, Axel. Wayne women have a way of driving men crazy." Lucie stiffened slightly at the way Ruslan referred to her as a Wayne woman, as if she were a prize, a name, an asset. But she played along, leaning into his embrace. Axel's eyes darkened. "This is revenge, isn't it?" Lucie met his gaze head-on. "What if it is?" The tension between them was suffocating, but she refused to back down. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about reclaiming her dignity, her pride. And if playing along with Ruslan's charade helped her do that, then so be it. Ruslan's fingers brushed against her waist, drawing her attention back to him. "Shall we go, fiancé?" Lucie gave Axel one last glance before slipping into the waiting car. She didn't know what she had just agreed to. But there was no turning back now. The silence in the car was thick as Lucie stared at the diamond on her finger. It was heavy, real, a symbol of something she had yet to understand. "Are you regretting it already?" Ruslan's voice was smooth, unreadable. She turned to him, studying the man beside her. He was nothing like Axel. Where Axel was all charm and deception, Ruslan exuded power and control. He was dangerous in a way that wasn't loud, but calculated. Lucie crossed her arms. "What do you even get out of this?" Ruslan smirked, his green eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Let's just say our engagement serves both our interests." Lucie narrowed her eyes. "And what exactly do you want?" He leaned in slightly, his presence consuming. "My dear, Axel has been a thorn in my side for years, and now, thanks to you, I have the perfect leverage." Her stomach twisted. She had known there was more to this than just a spectacle. But what was Ruslan's endgame? "You hate him that much?" she asked. Ruslan's smirk faded, his gaze turning cold. "Hate is a strong word. Let's just say I don't like when people take what isn't theirs. Something in the way he said it sent a chill down her spine. Lucie had just made a deal with the devil, and she wasn't sure if she would survive it. By the time they arrived at Ruslan's estate, Lucie felt the full weight of what she had just agreed to. The mansion loomed over her, modern, elegant, yet cold, just like the man who owned it. Ruslan led her inside, his presence commanding. "This is where you'll be staying from now on." Lucie scoffed. "So I'm just supposed to move in overnight?" Ruslan gave her a slow, lazy smile. "You agreed to be my fiancé. It would be rather suspicious if we lived separately, wouldn't it?" She hated how much sense that made. Before she could argue, a woman approached, tall, refined, with sharp eyes that reminded Lucie of a hawk. "Sir, your grandfather has requested a meeting." Lucie blinked. "Your grandfather?" Ruslan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yes, and trust me, he'll have plenty of questions about you." Lucie straightened. "Well, we wouldn't want to disappoint him, would we?" Ruslan smirked. "No, we wouldn't." As they walked deeper into the mansion, Lucie had a sinking feeling. She had entered Ruslan's world, and she wasn't sure if she would ever escape it. Axel sat in his office, gripping a tumbler of whiskey, his mind in chaos. Lucie, his Lucie, standing beside Ruslan, wearing his family's ring. It didn't make sense. He had expected her to cry, to beg him for an explanation after catching him with Celeste. Instead, she walked away without looking back. And now, she had thrown herself into the arms of a man who was far worse than he had ever been. Ruslan Score wasn't just his uncle. He was a man with power, influence, someone who never acted without a purpose. If he had chosen Lucie, there was a reason. Axel's grip tightened around the glass. He had made a mistake with Celeste. A moment of stupidity, of indulgence. But Lucie was different. She had always been different. And now, he was losing her. His office door swung open, and Celeste strolled in, her arms crossed. "So what's the plan?" Axel scowled. "Plan," Celeste scoffed. "Oh, don't play dumb. Lucie just got engaged to Ruslan Score. Do you think that's a coincidence? He's making a statement, and you're just going to sit here and drink?" Axel slammed the glass down, his patience snapping. "You think I don't know that?" Celeste leaned against his desk, twirling a strand of hair. "Then do something about it." Axel clenched his jaw. He had been reckless before. But this was war, and he wasn't about to let Lucie slip through his fingers. Lucie adjusted her dress, feeling the weight of Ruslan's expectations as they stepped into the grand hall of his family estate. She had expected something cold and minimalistic, but instead the mansion exuded an air of old money, rich, opulent, yet suffocating. At the center of the room sat a man with a commanding presence, his silver hair neatly combed back, eyes sharp as a blade. Ruslan's grandfather. The moment those piercing eyes landed on Lucie, she felt like she was being sized up, judged. "And this is the woman you chose?" The old man's voice was low, but laced with authority. Ruslan smiled, placing a hand on Lucie's waist. "Yes, meet Lucie Wayne, my fiancée." Lucie held her ground, meeting the man's gaze. She had dealt with powerful men all her life. She wouldn't be intimidated. His gaze flicked to her ring, then back to Ruslan. "Interesting choice." Lucie wasn't sure if that was approval or disappointment. Ruslan smirked. "I've always had an interesting taste." The tension in the room was thick, but Lucie forced herself to stay composed. She had played this game with Vivian and Celeste for years. She knew how to wear a mask. But then, the old man leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Tell me, Lucie, why should I believe this engagement isn't just an elaborate game?" Lucie's pulse quickened. She hadn't expected to be tested so soon, but she refused to back down. With a slow, deliberate smile, she intertwined her fingers with Ruslan's and met the old man's gaze. "Because I wouldn't risk my heart for a game." Ruslan's grip on her hand tightened slightly, whether in amusement or approval, she couldn't tell. His grandfather studied her for a long moment before leaning back. "We shall see." Lucie exhaled slowly. She had passed the first test, but she had a feeling the real challenges were just beginning. Axel stormed into his father's office, his temper barely restrained. His father, Theodore Score, barely glanced up from his paperwork. "What is it now?" Axel slammed a magazine onto the desk, another tabloid cover flaunting Lucie and Ruslan's engagement. This time, the headline was bolder. "Ruslan Score's fiancé, a love story or a power move." "This isn't a joke," Axel growled. Ruslan is using her for something, and I need to know why. Theodore sighed, setting down his pen. Why do you care? You had your chance with Lucie, and you threw it away. Axel's fists clenched. I made a mistake, but she's mine. Ruslan doesn't get to take what's mine. His father finally met his gaze, unimpressed. And what do you plan to do? Cry to the press? Confront him? He scoffed. Ruslan isn't like you. He doesn't play games he can't win. Axel ground his teeth. He knew that. That was the problem. But Lucie wasn't just a pawn in Ruslan's schemes, and Axel would be damned if he let his uncle have her. Lucie barely had time to settle into the routine of being Ruslan's fiancé before an unexpected invitation arrived. A charity gala, one hosted by the Scores, and Axel would be there. Lucie's heart pounded as she read the invitation, knowing this wasn't just an event. This was a battlefield. She turned to Ruslan, who had just finished buttoning his cufflinks, looking as composed as ever. Did you know about this? Ruslan smirked. Of course, Axel wants a confrontation. Let's give him one. Lucie hesitated. I don't want to be a tool in whatever war you two are waging. Ruslan stepped closer, his gaze locked onto hers. You're not a tool, Lucie. You're the queen on the board. His words sent a shiver down her spine. She wasn't sure if that was comforting or terrifying. The gala was breathtaking. Golden chandeliers, a sea of socialites, and whispers that followed Lucie with every step she took beside Ruslan. She ignored the stares, keeping her head high. If they wanted a show, she'd give them one. Ruslan's hand rested lightly on her waist as he guided her through the crowd, the perfect picture of a devoted fiancé. Then she saw him, Axel. He was watching her from across the room, his jaw tight, his fists clenched. Celeste stood beside him, smirking like she had won something. Lucie met his gaze and smiled. Axel's expression darkened as he strode toward them. Lucie, his voice was low, controlled, but she could hear the tension underneath. She tilted her head. Axel. His eyes flickered to Ruslan. Enjoying your revenge? Ruslan chuckled, completely unbothered. Oh, this isn't about revenge. He took Lucie's hand and lifted it, showing off the ring. This is about something much bigger. Lucie watched as Axel's composure cracked just slightly. Good. Axel leaned in closer, lowering his voice. If you think Ruslan actually cares about you, you're a fool. Lucie didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled sweetly. Funny, that's exactly what I used to think about you. Axel's eyes flashed with something unreadable. Regret, anger, desperation. But before he could say anything else, Ruslan smoothly pulled Lucie away. Let's not waste any more time on the past, darling. We have a future to celebrate. Lucie followed him without looking back. She had won this round. But something told her the war was far from over. The ride home from the gala was silent, yet charged with an unspoken tension. Lucie stared out of the tinted window, her mind replaying the confrontation with Axel. She should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt unsettled. You handled yourself well tonight, Ruslan finally spoke, his voice smooth and unreadable. Lucie turned to him, studying his composed expression. Was that a test? His lips twitched in amusement. A necessary one. She let out a dry chuckle. And did I pass? Ruslan leaned in slightly, his green eyes gleaming. With flying colors. Lucie hated how her pulse quickened at his proximity. He was dangerous, not just in power, but in the way he made her feel like she was walking a tightrope. You enjoy this, don't you? She murmured. Playing with people. Ruslan smirked. And you don't, she scoffed. I don't play games, Ruslan. His gaze dipped to her lips before returning to her eyes. Then what was tonight? Lucie exhaled sharply, pulling away. A performance. Ruslan's smirk didn't waver. She hated that he was right, because for a fleeting moment tonight, standing beside him, playing the role of his devoted fiancé, it hadn't felt like a performance at all. Days passed, and the lines between their arrangement and reality began to blur. Lucie found herself falling into a rhythm within Ruslan's world. Dinners together, public outings, late-night conversations over whiskey, and Ruslan, despite his cold reputation, was intoxicating. He was direct, never feeding her illusions. He didn't sugarcoat things like Axel once did. If he wanted something, he made it known. And that scared her. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of his estate, Lucie watched the city lights twinkle below them. Ruslan poured her a glass of wine, his movements slow, calculated. Tell me, Lucie, what do you want from all this? She frowned. From this arrangement? He nodded. Lucie hesitated. I want to be untouchable. I want to stop being someone men think they can betray and toss aside. Ruslan studied her for a long moment before setting his glass down. Good, she arched her brow. That's all you have to say? He leaned forward, his voice lower now. Because, my dear, the only way to be untouchable is to stop pretending you don't enjoy the power that comes with it. Lucie swallowed hard, because, deep down, she knew he was right, and that terrified her more than anything. The illusion of control shattered when Lucie woke up in the middle of the night to find Ruslan gone. She slipped out of bed, wrapping a robe around her as she stepped into the dimly lit hallway. She found him in his study, seated in a leather chair, whiskey in hand. He looked different, not the composed, untouchable man he always presented to the world, but someone haunted. She hesitated before stepping closer. Couldn't sleep? Ruslan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Something like that. Lucie crossed her arms. You know, for someone who enjoys control, you look like you're fighting ghosts. Ruslan let out a low chuckle, but it lacked amusement. Maybe I am. Lucie hesitated before moving toward him. Tell me. Ruslan sighed, running a hand through his hair. My grandfather built an empire, Lucie, one that demands loyalty, strength, and above all, power. He looked at her then, something dark flickering in his eyes. Do you know what happens to those who fail to meet those expectations? Lucie's breath hitched. He wasn't just talking about business. He was talking about survival. And for the first time, she realized Ruslan wasn't just a man who played games. He was a man who had learned how to survive them. And now, she was a part of that world. Lucie had spent years learning how to read people, how to pick apart lies, how to sense manipulation. But Ruslan was a puzzle she hadn't cracked yet, and that intrigued her more than she cared to admit. She watched him as he swirled the whiskey in his glass, the golden liquid catching the dim light. There was something almost vulnerable about him in this moment, but she knew better than to mistake it for weakness. You never told me what happens to those who fail, she finally said, her voice soft but firm. Ruslan smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. Because you already know, Lucie. A shiver ran down her spine. He leaned back, studying her. You think you're the only one who's been betrayed? The only one who's been discarded? Lucie clenched her jaw. I never said that. Ruslan set his glass down and stood, moving closer to her. My father was supposed to take over the family empire, but he wasn't strong enough. He made mistakes. Do you know what happens to men who make mistakes in this world? Lucie didn't answer. They disappear, Ruslan said, his voice quieter now. And those left behind either learn how to survive, or they disappear too. Lucie inhaled sharply. This wasn't just about power. This was about survival. And suddenly, she understood why Ruslan never let himself be vulnerable. Because vulnerability in his world was a death sentence. Lucie didn't know why she reached for his hand, but she did. Ruslan stiffened for a moment, as if unfamiliar with the comfort of a simple touch. But he didn't pull away. You don't have to be alone in this, she murmured. He let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. You think you can save me, Lucie? She met his gaze. No, but maybe I can remind you that you're still human. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ruslan reached out, his fingers tracing the side of her face with a gentleness that caught her off guard. Careful, Lucie, he whispered. You're playing a dangerous game. She swallowed. Then let's make sure I win. Something dark flickered in his eyes before he leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, slow, deliberate, as if testing her resolve. Lucie didn't pull away, because at that moment, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't just playing the game anymore. She was falling into it. The next morning, Lucie woke up in Ruslan's bed. Not because they had crossed that line, but because somehow she had fallen asleep beside him in his study, and he had carried her here. She turned, watching as Ruslan stood by the window, already dressed, sipping his coffee like the previous night had never happened. You're awake, he said without looking at her. Lucie sat up, pulling the silk sheets around her. Did you stay up all night? Ruslan finally turned, his gaze unreadable. I had things to handle. She studied him. You don't trust easily, do you? His lips twitched, but it wasn't quite a smile. Trust gets people killed, Lucie. She tilted her head. Then why do you trust me? Ruslan walked over, placing his coffee cup down before leaning in slightly. Who said I do? Lucie's breath hitched. She should have felt insulted. Instead, she felt challenged, and she had never been one to back down from a challenge. Lucie had almost started to believe that things between her and Ruslan were stabilizing, if anything in his world could be called stable. But that illusion shattered the moment she saw the black envelope on his desk. She picked it up hesitantly, fingers grazing the expensive cardstock. There was no name, no markings, just an unmistakable weight to it. Ruslan entered the room just as she was about to open it. "Don't!" His voice was sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. Lucie looked up, startled. "What is this?" Ruslan snatched the envelope from her grasp, his jaw tight. "A message." "From who?" He exhaled slowly before meeting her gaze. "Someone who wants me dead." A chill ran down Lucie's spine. "You're serious?" Ruslan opened the envelope, revealing a single playing card, the King of Spades. But the most unsettling part wasn't the card itself. It was the blood-red slash across the center. Lucie swallowed hard. "What does it mean?" Ruslan's expression darkened. "It means the hunt has begun." Lucie had heard whispers about the hunt before, an unspoken game among the city's most powerful. When a man became too much of a threat, someone put a price on his head, a quiet bounty, a warning before the real attack. "How bad is this?" she asked. Ruslan smirked, but there was no amusement in his eyes. "Bad enough that I can't afford to make a mistake." Lucie crossed her arms. "And what about me? Am I in danger too?" Ruslan stepped closer, his gaze intense. "You were in danger the moment you became my fiancé." Lucie's heartbeat quickened. "So what now?" Ruslan exhaled, rolling his sleeves up. "Now we prepare for war." The first attack came that night. Lucie had just stepped out onto the balcony when she noticed something strange, movement in the shadows across the street. Then she saw it, the glint of a sniper's scope. Her body reacted before her mind did. "Ruslan!" A gunshot rang out. Strong arms yanked her down as the bullet shattered the glass behind them. Lucie gasped, her body pinned beneath Ruslan's. His face was inches from hers, his breathing heavy. "Are you hurt?" His voice was sharp, urgent. She shook her head, adrenaline surging through her veins. "No." Ruslan's jaw tightened as he pulled her to her feet. "We're leaving." Lucie didn't argue, because for the first time since this all began, she wasn't just playing a role, she was living it. And now she was a target. The bullet hole in the glass was a message, a declaration of war. But if their enemies thought Ruslan Score was the kind of man to run, they were sorely mistaken. Lucie watched as he made call after call, his voice calm but deadly. His men moved like a well-oiled machine, securing the perimeter, sweeping the building for more threats. She had never seen him like this before. This wasn't just the controlled, ruthless businessman. This was the man who had survived the darkest corners of power, and now he was preparing to eliminate anyone who dared to challenge him. "You're going after them, aren't you?" Lucie asked, arms crossed. Ruslan glanced at her. "Of course." Lucie exhaled, stepping closer. "Then I want in." He arched his brow. "This isn't your fight." Lucie's jaw clenched. "That sniper could have killed me. That makes it my fight." Ruslan studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Fine, but if you're in, you do exactly as I say." Lucie smirked. "No promises." Ruslan let out a low chuckle. "You really don't know how to follow orders, do you?" She met his gaze, fire in her eyes. "Guess you'll have to keep up. The first rule of war, strike before they expect it." Lucie watched from the back seat as Ruslan's car pulled up outside an exclusive underground club, a known meeting place for those who operated in the city's shadows. "This is where the hit was ordered," Ruslan said. "If I take out the right person, the rest will back off." Lucie frowned. "That's not a guarantee," Ruslan smirked. "Nothing ever is." Before she could say more, he reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a sleek black pistol, handing it to her. Lucie hesitated. "You trust me with this?" Ruslan's gaze darkened. "Trust is a strong word, but I trust you want to live." She took the gun, her grip steady. "Let's do this." Inside the club, the air was thick with smoke and tension. Eyes followed Ruslan as he walked in, his presence like a warning bell. Lucie stayed close but kept her posture confident. If they looked weak, they were already dead. Then she saw him, the man Ruslan was after. A mid-level boss who handled contracts for the city's underworld. Ruslan didn't waste time. He walked straight up to him, grabbed his wrist, and slammed it against the table. The man yelped, his drink spilling. "What the—" Ruslan leaned down, his voice low, dangerous. You took money to have me killed." The entire club went silent. The man swallowed hard. It wasn't personal." Ruslan pulled out his gun and pressed it against the man's temple. "It is now." Lucie's heart pounded. This wasn't just a warning. This was Ruslan showing the world that coming for him was a death sentence. The man's face paled. I'll cancel the contract," Ruslan smirked. "Good. Now tell me who paid you." The man hesitated. Lucie stepped forward and whispered, "If you don't, I will pull this trigger myself." The man's eyes darted to hers, and he saw it. She wasn't bluffing. His lips trembled as he finally said a name. Lucie's blood ran cold, because the name he uttered was Axel Score. Lucie gripped the gun tighter, her breath shallow as the name echoed in her ears. Axel, her ex-fiancé. The man who had once promised her forever, now the man who had tried to have her killed. Ruslan remained eerily calm, his grip on the terrified informant unwavering. "Tell me everything." The man gulped. "Axel wanted you out of the way. He paid double the usual price to ensure it was clean, no loose ends." His eyes flickered to Lucie, "and he wanted her taken, not killed." Lucie's stomach churned. Taken? What the hell was Axel planning? Ruslan's jaw ticked, his fingers flexing around the gun before he abruptly released the man. "You just bought yourself another day to live. Use it wisely." With that, he grabbed Lucie's hand and pulled her toward the exit. His grip was firm, protective, possessive. "We're going to see Axel," he said, his voice like ice. Lucie swallowed hard. "Good, because I have a few things to say to him myself." They stormed into Axel's penthouse without warning. The guards barely had time to react before Ruslan's men had them restrained. Axel, lounging in his expensive suit with a glass of scotch, smirked as if he had been expecting them. "Uncle," he drawled lazily, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" His eyes flickered to Lucie. "And my dear Lucie, I knew you'd come back to me." Lucie stiffened. Ruslan, however, was deathly still. "You put a hit out on me." Axel's smirk widened. "I wouldn't call it a hit, just an opportunity." He took a slow sip of his drink. "You've been in my way for years, Ruslan. This was bound to happen eventually." Lucie stepped forward, fury burning in her veins. "And what about me? You wanted me taken?" Axel's gaze darkened with something twisted. "You were mine first, Lucie. You belong with me." A shiver of disgust crawled down her spine. "I was never yours." Axel chuckled. "Come now, let's not pretend. You think my uncle actually cares about you? You're just a piece in his game, same as me. You really think you'll win?" Lucie lifted the gun Ruslan had given her and aimed it at Axel's chest. "I already have." Axel's smirk faltered for the first time. "You wouldn't." Lucie's finger hovered over the trigger. Every memory of his betrayal, every lie, every manipulation, it all crashed over her at once. She wanted to pull the trigger, but she wouldn't, because killing Axel would be too easy. Instead, she took a step closer, her voice steady. "You don't deserve an easy way out, and you don't deserve me." Then she turned to Ruslan. "You said you'd handle this? Make sure he never comes near me again?" Ruslan's smirk was cold and deadly. "Consider it done." Axel paled. "Wait." But Lucie didn't stay to hear his pleas. She walked out of the penthouse, knowing Axel's fate was sealed. She didn't need revenge. She had already won. Lucie stood by the window of Ruslan's penthouse, watching the city stretch beneath her. The night was quiet, yet her mind was anything but. Axel was gone. Ruslan had made sure of that. She didn't ask for details, and he didn't offer them. All she knew was that Axel's score would never haunt her again. But instead of feeling victorious, a strange emptiness settled inside her. "You're quiet," Ruslan's deep voice cut through the silence. She turned to see him standing a few feet away, his sharp eyes scanning her face as if searching for something. Lucie sighed. "I should feel relieved, shouldn't I?" Ruslan stepped closer. "You tell me." She hesitated before meeting his gaze. "Axel was my past, and now he's gone. But what about my future?" A smirk tugged at Ruslan's lips. "That depends. What do you want it to be?" Lucie exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "For so long, my life was about him, about proving something. But now," she trailed off. "Now I don't know what's next." Ruslan reached out, his fingers brushing against her chin, tilting her face up to his. "You don't need to know everything right now, Lucie," he murmured. "You just need to know one thing." Her breath hitched. "And what's that?" Ruslan leaned in, his lips ghosting over hers before whispering, "You're not alone in this." Lucie closed her eyes as warmth flooded her chest. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't fighting for someone else. She wasn't fighting to be loved, to be chosen. She was standing on her own. And Ruslan? He was standing beside her, not as her savior, but as her equal. Maybe she didn't know what the future held. But as Ruslan finally closed the distance and kissed her, slow and deep, she knew one thing for certain. She was exactly where she was meant to be.